My father moved to Blair in 1940 and was there until he retired in 1967. From sometime in the mid-40s, I was, as a child, obviously, growing increasingly conscious of the importance of a railway because, well, it would, I think, be a little bit of an exaggeration to say that Blair Atholl was a railway village, as it were. The railway was probably more or less as important as the estates as a source of employment, etc. During that period, as I say, we used the station just as everybody else did. Very few people had cars. You took the train, and of course there was the local train service as well as the mainline trains. And Blair Atholl was the railway complex in Blair Atholl, not just the passenger station, but of course the engine shed was hugely important in the running of a railway because it provided not only the engines for the local train service into Perth through all the various stations that are now closed, but of course provided the engines to push the trains up to down the Spittal to allow them to get over to Mochta. As far as I can recall, they were inaccurately, in a sense, generally referred to as pilot engines, though most of them, in fact, were used as banking engines. And from our house, my main view of a railway was the trains, down trains coming in from the south, and the long distance trains, say, either passenger or goods. And then the train would pull past our windows, as it were, across the field, which is now the public park. And then a minute or so, probably less, the banking engine would run down the up line, more or less onto the Tilt Bridge. It would toot to tell the signalman that it was there. He would change the points, and it would go up the down line to take its place at the bottom of the train. So I saw plenty of railway movement because the points doubling the track at the, well, you would call it the south end, in fact, it's really the east end of the station. The signal boxes in Blair Atholl were Blair Atholl North and Blair Atholl South, but in fact, they actually, in compass terms, they were actually east and west. So Blair Atholl South was the one by the level crossing, which still exists, and Blair Atholl North was up just beyond where the tracks from the engine sheds went on. That the points were slightly nearer the Tilt Bridge than they are now, so that the banking engine would be just onto the bridge. It would be under the west bank arch of the Tilt Bridge when it would stop. As I say, it would toot and then make its way back up the line. My father and I frequently trespassed on the railway because we used the Tilt Bridge as the illegal route to get to the golf course, where my father was, I think, both secretary and treasurer.
And your father was the bank manager?
Aye.
And you lived in the bank house?
We lived in the bank house.
Yeah.
He was the second and last bank manager in the bank at Blair, I think.
He was a bank manager, but he didn't own a car.
As far as cars were, my father was able to afford a car as a bank accountant. He had owned a car at the beginning of the war. It needed major repairs. As a bank manager, he did not have priority to get it repaired, and he sold it to the Atholl Properties Clerk of Works.
Right.
And so he was without a car until the late 40s.
Anyway, let's come back to the station.
Right.
You said that you were aware of the hijinks that the kids going to school got up to.
Yeah. Well, basically that I don't think there was much trouble associated with the kids going down on the 10 to 9 local train to Pitlochry. It was people would travelling on the mainline trains would reckon that their journey between Pitlochry and Blair Atholl would be disturbed by kids rampaging up and down the corridors and opening compartment doors and shouting and generally just being rowdy. I certainly can't ever associate it being any accidents or near misses or people, falling out the windows, which of course in those days were, the old strap windows on trains.
Yeah.
But most people in Blair Atholl sort of deplored it in a sort of rather helpless way in which it didn't do the village's reputation any good. That
Let's take you to the 1960s and the beaching cuts. Were you aware of that happening at the time?
yes, I mean by that time I was basically simply coming home on holidays.
Yeah.
The radical changes in Blair Atholl station would have happened whether beaching came along or not, because the key thing there was moving from steam to diesel, which meant that the banking engines were no longer required. So that, and in fact, there were diesel units had replaced the steam trains, providing the local service. Killycranky, Pitlochry, Ballinluig, Guy, Dalguys, Dunkeld, Mursley, etc. So they had gone on to diesel, so that the whole point that made Blair Atholl, from a railway running point of view, a much more important station than Pitlochry, had disappeared. The period was a period in which so many people did cut their own cars, etc. That the structure of rural transportation was changing generally. The branch line to Aberfeldy closed in 1965 because it was only a few weeks short of its centenary. But at that time, how many people actually, say from Blair Atholl, it was, I think, more convenient actually to take the bus. I think there's possibly 3 or 4 things that I might mention. I mean, I certainly, in my time, one still went to the ticket window when I was a child to buy your ticket. There would be somebody behind it, and they would do the usual business of buying your ticket through the window. And then, as I recall, that tended to be closed, and you just went to the sort of entrance to the station office, as it were. And there was a counter which served as a barrier then. And certainly that was the case in Jimmy McBain's day. Jimmy McBain was a major character in Blair Atholl. He was Blair Atholl Station. He got written about in the press, etc. He was particularly important when the Scout Jamborettes were on. And I know in later years, I mean, as things got more and more informal, at least if you were known, you didn't use the sit in the benches outside, unless it was nice weather, of course, or use the waiting room. You just sat in the station office, and there would be a huge roaring fire, and you could sit there in armchair comfort and wait till the train came in, and Jimmy would go around his business selling tickets if he had to, or listening to all his various bells ringing and the various apparatus which the railway used. And then as the train just pulled into the station, you roused yourself and walked out and got on.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, the station was a station master in
Yes.
Blair.
Yes.
And as I say, it was a more important and senior job on the railway than it would have been if Blair Atholl had been a station like, say, Dunkeld, with no running sheds, etc., etc., etc. Just the actual hierarchy as to whether the station master was entirely in charge of the running sheds or whether the local locomotive engineer or whatever was in charge. I don't know. But Mr. Watt lived in it was the first house in Pitlochry Road. I'm not sure whether he was station master or whether it was after he retired that he moved there. If he was there when he was station master, it would have meant that he wasn't living in the station house. I have a feeling the station house was let out at some times.
Yeah.
In Jimmy McBain's time, Jimmy, as far as I know, was the only station employee at Blair. So he would be responsible for everything from selling tickets, etc. By that time, I think the North box would have been closed. So the only other permanent railway employees probably would have been the signalman operating the South box beside the Ford Road level crossing. I've never been in a station house. Well, I know there are some structural alterations because, as you can see from the photographs, the station house was originally built as a sort of Swiss chalet type design. I think certainly I know that end of the station, where you come in off the road, coming up past the Atholl Arms bar, there was at one time a lean-to shed which the various station barrows were kept. And I think there may actually have been a more extensive bit of demolition there.
There
I'm not
was.
quite sure.
It was the Duke's private waiting room.
Aye.
Was brought down in the 1960s.
I mean, I find the railways interesting simply because they, as it were, imposed and demanded quite novel structures in all sorts of ways. The other things, of course, that are minor other points. As far as I'm aware, it was always said that one of the conditions the Duke made for going through its lands was that all trains should stop in Blair Atholl. You know what a Black 5 is? The main line engine used basically all my lifetime till steam disappeared on the main line was what was called a Black 5. And these were 460 engines. These were engines which, in order to line up with the water towers, the thing with a big hose coming out of it, which is stuck into the water tank at their station, the Black 5s were long enough that they actually came out into the level crossings. I can always remember that it was quite a thing looking up at the front end of this very big engine crossing the line. The railway in those days, it's worth remembering, didn't just convey passengers, it conveyed all sorts of things in the guard's van. I know on occasions, rather than if a father was sending a report to Perth for the newspaper, rather than put it through the mail, I would be told to go up to the station and it would travel down on the train. Or I know once a year the keeper at down the Spital was told by his boss to send down to my father a haunch of venison. So the venison would be put on the train down the Spital station and would be offloaded at Blair, and I would be sent up to the station to collect it.
Mhm.
Basically, there was a lot of traffic, of course, of mainline goods trains.
Yeah.
They all required a pilot or a banking engine.
Mhm.
I think they would normally get a banking engine. But my own impression is that the vast majority of the trains got banking engines rather than pilot engines. Point is that the banking engine at the back of a train isn't coupled to the train. Well, it doesn't need to be. And the Highland Railway practice was to couple them, but LMS was not to. So when you got to Downspittle, all the banking engine needed to do was simply
Stop.
slow down,
Yeah.
and the train
Yeah.
went on.
Yeah.
There were local goods trains. In fact, one of the main excuses if my pals or I were late coming home for our tea was, "Oh, sorry, Mum, the 4:30 goods must have been late today," because we didn't watch it. We estimated the time from seeing what trains were coming up and down. So we, to say there was a local goods train, it usually came up about 4:30, and we would reckon that if we were in sight of a railway, we would reckon that was when we should get home for our
Yeah.
tea.
Yeah.